Bias blind spot, the tendency to perceive oneself as less susceptible to cognitive biases than others. Gambler's fallacy, the mistaken belief that past events influence future probabilities, when in fact, they remain unchanged. Omission bias, the inclination to judge harmful actions as morally worse than equally harmful inactions. Proportionality bias, our innate tendency to assume that significant events have equally significant causes, possibly contributes to the acceptance of conspiracy theories. Moral credential effect, when individuals who perform a good deed feel licensed to behave less morally in the future. Self-serving bias, the tendency to attribute successes to oneself while blaming failures on external factors. Framing effect, interpreting information differently depending on its presentation, which encompasses phenomena like the contrast effect, leads to varied conclusions drawn from identical data. Pygmalion effect, the behavior of a person can be influenced by the expectations of others, leading to the manifestation of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Decoy effect, a marketing phenomenon occurs when the introduction of a third option influences the preference between two options, leveraging the principle of asymmetric dominance. Selection bias. This bias occurs when individuals, groups, or data are chosen for analysis without proper randomization, resulting in a sample that does not accurately represent the intended population. Anchoring bias, the inclination to heavily lean on the initial information obtained when making decisions poses a challenge in adjusting from that initial reference point. This bias is commonly utilized in negotiations, where an initial high price sets the baseline for bargaining. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out, interpret, emphasize, and recall information in a manner that validates existing beliefs or hypotheses. Overconfidence effect, the inclination to display unwarranted confidence in one's own responses or assessments, despite evidence indicating otherwise. Egocentric bias, the inclination to overly prioritize one's own perspective or abilities, can result in phenomena like the false consensus effect and false uniqueness bias. Information bias, the cognitive bias of seeking additional information even when it has no bearing on decision-making or actions. Hindsight bias, the inclination to view past events as more predictable than they truly were, commonly referred to as the "I knew it all along" effect. Projection bias, overestimating how much one's future selves will align with current preferences, thoughts, and values, can result in making less than ideal decisions. Apophenia, the inclination to see meaningful connections between unrelated things, which can result in reinforcing stereotypes and overestimating correlations. Serial position effect, the inclination to remember the initial and final items in a list more effectively than those in the middle. Recency bias, assigning greater significance to the most recent events or information, is often influenced by the serial position effect. Authority bias, the inclination to assign higher credibility to the viewpoints of authority figures, irrespective of the substance of their opinions. Unit bias, the inclination to consume a recommended standard quantity, irrespective of its suitability for the individual. Availability cascade, a self-reinforcing cycle occurs when a collective belief becomes more credible as it is repeatedly encountered in public discussions, linked to the availability heuristic. Bandwagon effect, the inclination to adopt specific behaviors or beliefs due to the influence of others or a lack of information, known as conformism, is a common tendency. Illusory truth effect, the inclination to consider statements as true simply because they are familiar, even if one cannot remember where they heard them. Next in line effect, reduced memory retrieval of words spoken by the person immediately preceding oneself in a predetermined speaking sequence. In-group bias, the inclination to prefer individuals perceived as part of one's own group, which is influenced by the mere exposure effect. Spotlight effect, overestimating how much others pay attention to and focus on one's appearance or behavior. Choice supportive bias, recalling one's choices as superior to reality, assigning positive traits to selected options and negative traits to those left unchosen. Ostrich effect, avoiding potentially negative yet valuable information to circumvent psychological discomfort. Selective perception, bias, observing and recalling stimuli that validate pre-existing beliefs while swiftly disregarding those that evoke emotional discomfort. Peak end rule, interpreting an experience not by considering all its components, but rather by focusing on its highest point and concluding moments. Actor-observer bias, overemphasizing personality traits to explain others' actions, while attributing one's own behavior primarily to situational factors. Picture superiority effect. The phenomenon is where concepts retained through visual images are more readily recalled than those learned through textual information. Outcome bias. Judging decisions are based on their eventual outcomes rather than their quality at the time they were made. Mere exposure effect. Forming preferences or aversions towards things solely due to their familiarity. Hard easy effect. Overestimating one's capacity to tackle challenging tasks while underestimating one's ability to handle straightforward tasks. Survivorship bias. Focusing solely on successful outcomes while disregarding failures can result in a distorted perception of reality. Baader-Meinhof. Phenomenon. The phenomenon known as the frequency illusion occurs when something that has recently captured attention seems to appear more frequently shortly afterward due to heightened awareness. Availability. Heuristic. Overestimating the probability of events due to their ease of recall is influenced by factors like recency, emotional impact, or uniqueness. Dunning-Kruger effect. Individuals lacking skill often overestimate their abilities, while experts typically underestimate theirs. Halo effect. The positive or negative traits of an individual can impact perceptions across various aspects of their personality.